Hello there, and welcome to today's session of Every Mark Matters with Mr. Mac. Today we're having a look at Edexcel Paper 2, Anglo-Saxon and Norman England, and we've got an absolutely tasty question today, and I think it's a really lovely question. So our question of the day is the destruction of lives and property was the main consequence of the harrying of the North. How far do you agree? So let's begin to break down the components of this question so we've got a clear understanding of what it wants us to do, what Edexcel wants us to do, and what knowledge is required for this question. All right, so first and foremost, let's begin with a command phrase. And with this question, it is how far do you agree? What that means is you must present the argument. And you need to evaluate reasons, or in this instance, consequences. Okay, right, so we need to create an argument, we need to present the argument, and what we now need to do is we need to think about, well, what relevant knowledge do we have about this question? So let's have a quick look at the focus of the question. All right, and our focus of the question, because there is a little bit of a trap here because it has got the harrying of the North, but the focus of the question is consequences of the harrying of the North. So if you just simply describe what happens, you're going to get into serious trouble for it. But if you're referring to the consequence of the harrying of the North, then that's where you're going to pick up marks. Okay, so why don't you now obviously we have got destruction. You know, it refers to that in the question, so we can use that as one of them. But why don't you press pause and why don't you begin to consider what knowledge you have about consequence of the harrying of the North that might be relevant for this question. Press pause and I'll see you very shortly. Right, okay, welcome back. So let's just start with the one with the consequence in the question. So remember, we have got 100,000 people killed. You know, that works out to be 75% of the population of the North. You know, he pours salt into the fields. You know, people are so hungry they turn to cannibalism. And villages are burnt down and destroyed. Okay, right, now let's think about other consequence. So another consequence, or another sort of hopeful consequence from William, it is to deter rebellions. You know, his ambition here is to scare the Anglo-Saxons into supporting him. You know, it's to act as a warning. We know this. How does it work? Because we know in 1071, in Hereward's rebellion, the Northerners don't support it, but moreover, there's no support from the North. And what I meant to say is that there's less Anglo-Saxon support after this event, because again, it acts as a warning. Okay? And then again, another consequence of the harrying of the North is to prevent future invasions. What do I mean by preventing future invasions? Well, we know that the Scottish are a threat. We have the Danes. Okay, so if the North is completely and utterly destroyed, they are not going to want to invade. You know, there is no reason for them to invade if there's nothing they can take from there. Okay? And William is very conscious. Remember, the north is very far away from William. You know, so he needs to make sure it's secure, and he needs to make sure that there's going to be no threats in the northern part of his kingdom. So we've got three possible reasons there, or three possible consequences, sorry. And I really want to stress this word consequence, because what we're looking for is that's exactly what the exam board are looking for. So the final part of the question is the second order concepts. These, you do not need to memorize these, or you do not need to know these. All right. What these are is this is a form of a disciplinary history, and what it means is the way that we present our knowledge. It's the way that we assess our knowledge, and we are looking at consequences. So if you talk about reasons for the harrying of the north, you will not get any marks. And remember, a consequence is how I've misspelled it, I made a mess there. How did X lead to Y? Or in this instance, how did the harrying of the north lead to Y? Okay? And that's what we need to be talking about. We're not talking about why it happened. We're talking about what were the consequences. For the Normans paper, it will always either be causes or causation or consequence. Okay? Right, before we start to answer it, just a polite reminder. This is a 16-mark question, so you need to spend 20 minutes writing down 4 paragraphs. For the very top marks, I'm going to suggest that you include a 2-sentence introduction, just giving your opinion. The reason why is that if you run out of time in the real exam, you have already got your judgment there ready and waiting. Okay, so we know what it's instructing us to do. We know what knowledge is relevant. We know what Edexcel wants us to do. All right, let's think about the mark scheme and let's have a look at what does the mark scheme want us to do. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put success criteria down here. I'm going to write down AO1, AO2, and AO2J. Okay, and your answers are scored in level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And as a matter of fact, just whilst I'm here, just a polite reminder. I'll just move my camera down here. Just a polite reminder. AO1 is knowledge. AO2 is explanation. And AO2 is J is judgment. Okay, and this question is literally marked very similar to an explain why. So for AO1 knowledge for level 3, what you need to do is you just need to do 2 facts per paragraph. Okay, for AO1 knowledge level 4, you need to have 2 precise facts. Per para. Okay, in terms of your explanation, you need 2 sentences. I'm just going to put EXP for explanation per paragraph. And for your level 4, you need to have 3 sentences. And that is how, why, so what. Okay, now this is the difference now from this question and the explain why. And the reason why is this gives you 4 marks for judgment. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to basically explain how much we agree with it. So for level 3, what you must do is you must begin to talk about, well, in essence, you need to just bring in your own opinion. And you will do that through a conclusion. So just a simple conclusion. Overall, I disagree with the statement because. Okay? For level 4, what you need to do is you need to have an evaluation. Okay, and what I mean by that, and this is a term I'm using from Edexcel, what you must do is you must compare reasons and must create a comparative judgment. So, for example, overall, I think X is important, is the main reason, is the main consequence because, however, I appreciate that Y and W, the other two reasons, are important because, but I still think X is important. Okay? And that's what you're doing with you're comparing the reasons together, but still sitting in on your own conclusion. It's quite tough, that, but genuinely, as you practice it over time, it will just naturally come. Right, ladies and gents, do you want to take the time to set yourself a 20-minute timer to have a go at explaining how far you agree with the statement that the destruction of lives was the main lives and property was the main consequence of the harrying of the North? 20 minutes, put all distractions away, set yourself a timer, and I'll see you shortly. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. Right, so hopefully you spent 20 minutes there having a go at answering this question about whether you agree with the statement that the destruction of lives and property was the main consequence of the harrying of the North. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read out my answer now, and as I'm reading it out to you, I am going to annotate my answer with AO1, AO2, and AO2. I might just put a J for judgment. Okay? AO1, remember, is knowledge. AO2 is explanation. If I see a precise fact, I might put AO1 plus. Okay? Right, let's have a quick look then. I accept. So this is by the looks of it, this is going to be my 2-sentence introduction. I accept that the harrying of the North led to the destruction of lives and property, but I do not think it was the main consequence. This is because it helped William establish control, prevented future rebellions, and deterred Viking invasions. Right, so I've stated my view, and I've brought in other opinions or other consequences as well. So as I said to you before, in case you run out of time in a real exam, if you've done this already, you've basically got 2 marks in the bag. So that's, in essence, that is just my 2-sentence introduction. Okay? Nice and quick. Let's have a look at my first paragraph. One reason why some might agree with a statement is because the harrying of the North devastated the area. For example, 100,000 people were killed in the event, and most villages and towns between York and Durham were burnt down, and all the animals were killed. AO1 and AO1. Right. And I've used for example again to demonstrate my knowledge. So that first sentence is AO2, where I've presented the reason, and this is my first fact here. And what I've done is I've simply just put in loads of precise facts here about places being destroyed, people being killed, and all the animals being killed. Right? Let's have a look at my second fact. Now, I love this phrase, this happened because. This happened because William needed to set an example of the rebels in the north and to show other parts of England what would happen if they rebelled or supported the rebellion. There's my second fact. Okay? So again, I've presented the reason, I've backed up what happened, I've said why he did it. Again, a fact about why he did it. Let's have a look at what my how, why, so what. So remember, I'm going to say how the devastation led to that consequence, or how the harrying of the North led to devastation, why it led to devastation, and so what is important about it. This meant that, a great explanation phrase, this meant that William needed to march his army north to destroy the area and people's livelihoods, which led to 100,000 deaths, and according to Order Vitalis, William regretting the damage he endured, regretting the damage he had done on his deathbed. Right, so there's my AO2 how. You know, rebellions, led to the harrying of the north, which meant they had to destroy the area to stop it. As a result, thousands of people fled the north and destroyed the farmland, prevented Scottish or Danish invasions. There's my why. Okay? This shows the impact of the event as it contributes to the other consequences. So what? And what it nicely does is it almost just feeds back in with my introduction that I think is important, but it's not as important as the others. Okay? Right. So that's my first paragraph there. I've presented why some might agree with it. I've put in two facts with loads of precise knowledge in with it. And I said how, why, so what. How the harrying of the north led to that consequence. Why the harrying of the north led to that consequence. So what. Why is that consequence important? Okay? Right, let's have a look at my next one. Another reason why one reason why some might disagree is because it helped them establish control over the Anglo-Saxons. Right, here's AO2. So I've presented the reason. I know from my own knowledge that rebellions led by Edwin and Morcar in 1068 and Edgar Etheling in 1069, which led to the death of Robert Cumin, meant that William needed a long-lasting strategy. So again, this looks like my first fact. Long-lasting strategy to deal with the rebels and deter future rebellions. So that was my first fact. Additionally, again, I'm bringing in my second fact using the connective additionally. In these rebellions, the Anglo-Saxons used guerrilla warfare as they could not defeat the Normans in open warfare. Again, there's my second fact. So I've got two facts in this paragraph. This meant that William harried the north as he removed the places that the rebels used to hide in and intimidate future rebellions as they would be scared of the consequences. Perfect. There's my AO2 how. Okay, so I'm simply saying, how would harrying of the north deter future rebellions? Well, it just destroys everywhere they hide, and again, it scares them into submission. As a result, explaining why, in 1071 and 1075, whereby William's rule was under threat from other rebellions, the majority of the Anglo-Saxons supported William's claims as they were too scared of the consequences. There's the why. This shows how establishing Norman control was the main consequence of the harrying of the north. And there's my so what. But do you know what as well? That is my judgment. Alright? So there's a little judgment mark there because I'm saying that it is the main consequence. And in essence, I'm disagreeing with the statement. Okay? Right, let's have a look at the final one. So you'll see there with my so what is I'm using that as an opportunity to bring in your own opinion. I don't think it's about destruction of lively lands and property. I think it's more about establishing control. Right, let's have a look at my final reason. A final reason why someone might disagree is that it deterred Scottish and Danish invasions. Right, there's my AO2. I've presented the reason. The harrying of the north led to 75% of the farmland destroyed, and it ultimately led to the end of Danelaw, meaning that the attractions of invading were significantly reduced. Perfect. There's my first fact. Again, loads of precise knowledge in there with 75% of the farmlands. Got rid of Danelaw. Again, precise knowledge there. And that the attractions of invading the north had basically disappeared. I also know that, another great phrase to tag on your second bit of knowledge, I also know that the Danes and the Scots were heavily involved in Edgar's rebellion, and William needed to deter them from future rebellions. Right, perfect. So again, there's precise knowledge there. Okay, and as you probably worked out, that's my second fact. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for my how, why, so what. This meant that William needed to strategically destroy the north to close off the northern threat and secure his throne. So again, this meant that is a great way of doing that, of demonstrating your how. So there's my how. As a result, Danish involvement in rebellions dramatically reduced to hit and run tactics, and the chance of Scottish invasions reduced to nothing, which shows the impact of the event on William's foreign invasions. There's my why, and you can tell I was beginning to running out of time here because I've not got a so what, which might pull me down a little bit, but we'll see. Ultimately, I believe that the main consequence of the harrying of the north was that it helped him establish control over the new kingdom and remove the threat of foreign invasion. I appreciate, so again, this is obviously my conclusion. So I think it's because it's to establish control over his new kingdom and remove the threat of foreign invasion. Now what I need to say, how I acknowledge other consequence. I appreciate the significance of the devastation of lives and property which led to huge numbers of people leaving, but the harrying of the north in the long run helped him establish control and deter foreign invasions. Perfect. So you notice I've used phrases like I appreciate and but, and what that does, it creates an evaluative conclusion. I am comparing consequences and saying which one I think is the most important. So if I just go back to the mark scheme here, 2 precise facts in every paragraph, yeah. How, why, so what in every paragraph, yes, with exception to the third one. Comparative judgment, absolutely. So what that does is that puts this answer here out of 16. It will either be 15 if I'm punishing myself for here, but what the exam board will most likely give you is they will give you 16 out of 16 for an answer like that. Really strong stuff. I look forward to reading yours. Take the time to self-assess yours using the success criteria, and I look forward to reading it. Take your time. I'll see you next time. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.